So I want you to picture this. It is 6:45 in the morning in Manila, and it's 1946.
Right. The war has just ended.
Exactly. The deadliest war in human history is over. And you are lying in this strange hotel bed, waking up, but not to an alarm clock. You're waking up to this deafening, chaotic, rhythmic hammering right outside your window.
It's heavy metal hitting stone.
Yeah, wood splintering, hundreds of people shouting over the noise. And it isn't construction. It's desperation. It's the visceral sound of a city that has been almost entirely leveled, just desperately trying to piece itself back together by hand.
And the craziest part is that that exact sound, that raw noise of human survival, is being broadcast directly into millions of comfortable American living rooms.
It really is wild to think about. Welcome to you, our listener, to another deep dive broadcasting live from Chesterton Radio right here in the heart of Atchison, Kansas. It is getting late, the radio dial is glowing in the dark, and we are just so glad you've pulled up a chair to join us in the room tonight as our third companion.
It really is the perfect atmosphere to step back into, well, one of the most precarious moments in our collective history.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we are tuning our frequency back to that post-war world of 1946 and 1947. The world is just sort of exhaling after years of total warfare.
But it's a super fragile piece.
Oh, incredibly fragile, like a pane of glass that a single loud noise could shatter. But at the exact same time, rising out of all that rubble, there is this desperate, almost clinging hope for unity.
Yeah, and right into the middle of that tension steps Norman Corwin. They actually called him the poet of radio.
Which is such a great title.
He totally earned it, though. He fundamentally changed how the medium operated. But before we even get into the actual journey, we have to establish what Corwin was even attempting to do.
Right, because this wasn't just a physical trip around the globe.
No, not at all. Though, I mean, the logistics of doing that in 1946 were staggering all on their own. But this was a deeply moral journey. The mission of our deep dive tonight is to really unpack Corwin's attempt to discover if humanity could truly become, well, one world. That was the title of his series.
One world flight. And he was asking this in the terrifying new light of the atomic age, too. We really want to figure out what those voices from the past mean for you listening to us today.
So how does a radio producer even get to do something like this?
Well, see, I always assumed he had to pitch CBS executives for months, just fighting tooth and nail for a massive budget. But this entire endeavor was actually handed to him as an award.
Wait, an award? That sounds more like a punishment.
Right. Calling a grueling 37,000-mile reporting trip a prize is a bit of a stretch.
It was an award that demanded an unbelievable amount of physical and intellectual labor. He was the very first recipient of the One World Award.
And the history of that is super vital.
Yeah, it was established in memory of Wendell Willkie. Willkie had famously taken this globe-circling trip in 1942, right in the thick of the war, and he wrote a massive best-selling book advocating for the concept of a united single world.
So the committee wanted to honor that legacy.
Yeah.
But instead of handing Corwin, like, a bronze plaque or a certificate to hang in his office, they handed him a mandate.
A literal flight around the globe to report on the state of humanity.
4 months. Over 37,000 miles. Touching down in 16 or 17 different countries.
Which is just a monumental scale. And this is where the actual mechanics of the journey fascinate me, because we really have to talk about the technology he was using.
Oh, the gear.
Yeah, right. Because if someone were doing a massive global reporting tour today, they would just slip a smartphone and a couple of sleek wireless mics into a backpack.
Yeah, you could record, edit, and upload a perfect audio file from a cafe in Warsaw straight to a server in New York in seconds.
Exactly. But Corwin and a CBS colleague, Lee Bland, they were operating in a completely different technological reality.
They were hauling around an early magnetic wire recorder.
And it is so hard to overstate how physically demanding that was. We aren't even talking about magnetic tape, which came a bit later.
No, this was a machine that pulled a literal microscopic thread of steel wire past a recording head.
It was incredibly heavy, encased in metal, and it required a totally stable power source.
You'd think dragging a massive metal box and a wire schooler into a mountain village or a crowded street would just intimidate people into silence.
Or just completely break down.
Yeah, I keep imagining the logistical nightmare. Like, what if the wire snaps?
Oh, if it snapped, you had to physically tie a tiny knot in the steel thread to splice it back together.
Which is insane. You're just hoping the knot wouldn't catch and destroy the playback head later.
Right. And knowing all that, it really forces me to challenge his entire methodology. I mean, with an itinerary that grueling and equipment that cumbersome, wasn't there a massive temptation to just set up shop in the comfortable capital cities?
Just interview the presidents, the prime ministers, maybe a general in a nice quiet parlor, and call it a day.
That is the path of least resistance. And honestly, it's exactly what most journalists of the era did.
And to be fair, he did speak to some leaders.
He did. He goes to number 10 Downing Street in London. He sits at the long cabinet table with the British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee.
And he actually captures Attlee puffing his pipe on the recording.
Yes, and Attlee is arguing that peace cannot just be the passive absence of war. He calls peace a constructive enterprise, requiring greater understanding between peoples, not just governments.
But Corwin knew that if he stopped there with the prime minister, he would only capture the polished diplomatic veneer of the post-war world.
The abstraction of it all.
Right. He totally understood that the people who declare the wars are rarely the ones who actually suffer the most from them.
Precisely. And that's why his methodology was so revolutionary. He placed equal, if not significantly greater weight on the voices of ordinary people.
He dragged that heavy wire recorder out of the parlors and right into the streets.
He took it to a shattered mountain village in Italy. He hauled it down a coal mine in Czechoslovakia.
He set it up on a noisy waterfront in Australia.
Because the goal was a true, unfiltered diagnostic of humanity's heart. He really wanted to know if the man working the steel girders in Warsaw felt the exact same way about the future of the atomic age as the prime minister sitting in London.
Which fundamentally changes the entire auditory experience for the listener.
It completely shifts it.
Because, a studio interview with a politician sounds like a studio interview. It's sterile, it's controlled. But the soundscape Corwin was building was murky and loud. It defied every neat little boundary of traditional radio.
To a listener in 1947, this must have felt like a literal magic trick. It broke the medium wide open.
You really have to put yourself in the shoes of a listener back then. Radio was largely bound by the acoustics of a studio.
Yeah, you had dramas with Foley artists shaking sheets of tin to simulate thunder, or newsreaders speaking in that polished mid-Atlantic accent into a ribbon microphone.
Field recording existed, but it was mostly combat recordings from the war.
Right. To construct a deliberate narrative documentary series that blended raw, authentic field recordings with deeply poetic narration that was totally uncharted territory.
He wasn't just reading a bulletin about a place, he was transporting you there. He was forcing the actual environment onto the listener.
Like that opening scene in Manila with the hammering?
Exactly. And the way he builds these scenes is so cinematic. There's this one moment where he takes you to a rooftop in Cairo on a warm August night.
Oh, I love this part.
He records the Muslim prayers echoing from the loudspeakers of the Muhammad Ali Mosque. And then slowly, blending right into that ancient chant, is the massive, chaotic cheering of thousands of Egyptians.
Because they're celebrating their independence from the British, which had literally just happened that morning.
Yes. And then, cutting through both the ancient prayer and the modern political celebration, is the roar of an airplane flying right overhead.
Mixing those three audio tracks together isn't just about creating a sense of place. It's an editorial argument.
It really is. It creates this whole narrative about colonialism ending, the persistence of faith, and the looming shadow of modern technology, all layered into a single sonic moment.
He uses those soundscapes to introduce the emotional and political complexity of the era before anyone even speaks a single word.
And then, when the people do finally speak, the emotional whiplash is just intense.
You really get this incredible, almost naive resilience on one end of the spectrum.
Like the Australian longshoreman he finds down on the docks in Sydney.
Ah, the man who proudly declared himself a member of the aristocracy of the working class?
Yes.
Yeah.
That phrase alone tells you so much about the post-war labor movement. He explains to Corwin with his robust, confident energy that he learned his public speaking from intense self-study.
He fully believes his union is leading the vanguard of human progress.
And you hear a similar, just unbridled vitality when Corwin visits New Zealand. He points his microphone at a group of schoolboys, and they're shouting out the names of their favorite movie stars, and then they perform a traditional Maori chant right there on their rugby field.
It's a sound bursting with life and untouched innocence.
But the brilliance of the series is how Corwin balances that untouched vitality with the stark, devastating realities of what the war left behind in Europe.
The contrast is what makes the documentary work so well. And the most heartbreaking example of this, and honestly, perhaps the most powerful argument for why he hauled that wire recorder into the mountains in the first place, is Camelia.
The widow in the Italian village of Genzano.
Yeah, that scene stops you cold.
It almost feels invasive to listen to.
Corwin finds her standing in the square of this completely shattered village under a broiling sun. She is just surrounded by the rubble of her former life.
And through an interpreter, Corwin gently asks her about her family.
The translation process here is crucial to the raw emotion of the tape. You hear the question in English, then the murmur of the Italian, and then the devastatingly clinical delivery of the answer.
She says she had 3 children. 2 died in the bombardment.
And her husband was killed in the exact same bombardment.
She lost her husband, 2 kids, and about 10 close relatives in a single day.
And then Corwin asks her what she eats.
Which is such a basic grounding question.
She replies that she never eats breakfast. For lunch, she has a thin soup. In the evening, a piece of bread.
She even farms out her one surviving child to relatives during the day, just so he can be fed a tiny bit better.
And then comes the question that defines the entire post-war crisis. Corwin asks what her hopes are for an improvement in her condition.
The interpreter turns to her, asks the question, and then turns back to the microphone to say she has no idea at all what to hope for.
It is absolute, crushing hopelessness, the complete absence of a future.
The grief captured by that wire recorder in the blazing Italian sun does something a studio broadcast could just never do. It makes the statistics bleed.
We read that millions died in Italy, but the human brain cannot process the word millions. We can only process Camelia.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the big political themes Corwin was uncovering. Because you really can't document that level of visceral suffering without arriving at profound questions about how to prevent it from happening again.
The central tension, the question driving the entire flight, is right there in the title. One world.
Everyone Corwin spoke to, virtually without exception, stated that they wanted peace.
But the mechanism of actually achieving that peace was completely paralyzed by suspicion.
Let's look at the different geopolitical strategies he documented, because he maps out 3 very distinct approaches to this post-war anxiety.
Right. First, you have Scandinavia. He visits Denmark, Norway, and Sweden.
And they're adopting a stance of absolute cooperative neutrality. But I want to understand how that actually functioned.
Yeah.
What did it mean to be neutral in a world that was rapidly polarizing?
Well, it wasn't a passive neutrality. It was an active, terrified balancing act. The Danish foreign minister, Gustav Rasmussen, and the Norwegian foreign minister, Halvard Lange, practically gave Corwin identical statements.
They explicitly stated they would not join any combination of powers or power blocks that might be regarded as a threat by other nations.
Exactly. Sweden, which had miraculously maintained its neutrality for over 140 years, echoed this sentiment entirely.
They understood that their geography placed them squarely between the emerging superpowers. Joining a bloc wouldn't protect them. It would just turn their soil into the next battlefield.
There is this fascinating interview with Prince Bertil of Sweden. He tells Corwin that to be a good Swede, you must at the same time be a good citizen of the world.
It sounds incredibly noble, but beneath that nobility, the fear is so palpable.
When Corwin asks the Danish finance minister, Thorkild Christensen, point blank if he thinks there will be another war, there's this long, chilling pause on the recording.
A heavy silence where you can practically hear the geopolitical anxiety.
And then he just says, I'm very much afraid of it.
That fear was the direct result of the second reality Corwin was documenting, which was the descent of the Iron Curtain.
And the most illuminating explanation of how this division was happening came when Corwin sat down in London with the writer J.B. Priestley.
Priestley didn't give a political or economic analysis, he gave a psychological one.
Yes. Priestley introduces the concept of psychological projection, applying Jungian concepts directly to nation-states.
And I really want to unpack this mechanism because it feels incredibly relevant to how we operate even today.
Priestley argues that nations project the darkest, unacknowledged contents of their own unconscious minds onto the outside world.
Think about the psychology of the war. For years, the Allied nations had a single, unifying, tangible enemy, the Axis powers.
All of their aggressive energy, all of their societal focus was directed outward toward defeating fascism. But the moment the war ended, that common enemy just vanished.
So they are left with this massive apparatus of war and a deep psychological habit of conflict, but no actual target.
Exactly. The sudden vacuum of purpose was terrifying. Priestley suggests that instead of looking inward and dealing with their own domestic fractures or their own latent authoritarianism or greed, the victorious nations had to invent new enemies.
They began drawing away from each other because they were still locked in the psychological mode of war.
They projected the evil bits of themselves onto their former allies, treating other countries like a blank wall to throw a lantern slide onto.
If you connect that to our reality right now, it is almost identical to how modern social media algorithms function.
Oh, 100%. They thrive on creating an outgroup.
We constantly project our worst assumptions onto political opponents or foreign nations because it's just easier to attack a caricature than to dismantle our own internal societal flaws.
Priestley saw the mechanics of the Cold War forming not just in troop movements, but in fundamental human psychology.
And that psychological tension, that profound suspicion, was playing out against a backdrop of massive physical and economic disparity.
Corwin's journey really highlights how difficult it is to have one world when the material realities of those worlds are light years apart.
The economic contrast he documents is staggering. He goes to Warsaw, Poland. He describes the city as a vast ruin, looking like a painter's imaginary conception of catastrophe.
The infrastructure is so completely annihilated that he witnesses workers literally hacking at thick steel girders with 16-inch handsaws.
They don't have acetylene torches. They don't have cranes. They are trying to rebuild an industrial city using medieval physical labor.
And then he flies to Shanghai, where the physical destruction of the war is compounded by a total collapse of economic trust.
He captures the mechanics of hyperinflation in a way that statistics just never could.
He sees a messenger carrying a wad of cash 3 inches thick, just holding millions of Chinese dollars in his bare hands, because the paper itself is virtually worthless.
A 7-year-old boy is selling a single cup of tea on the street for $100.
It destroys social cohesion. How can you plan for a peaceful future when the money in your pocket loses its value by the time you walk to the market?
But then, Corwin flies into Stockholm, Sweden, which is completely untouched by bombs. It's wealthy and full of American music and consumer goods.
Or he goes to New Zealand, where the economy is so stable and healthcare is free that a retired grocer casually tells him he has absolutely zero economic worries.
The whiplash is intense. Moving from a city where people are hacking steel by hand to a city where people are comfortably debating the minor administrative red tape in their socialized medicine.
It really begs the question, what could possibly bind these disparate realities together?
Well, Corwin believed the binding agent, the true common denominator regardless of a nation's wealth or poverty, was the demand for human dignity.
This is the third major theme he uncovers, and it emerges from both the top echelons of power and the absolute bottom of the social ladder.
We hear the top-down view in India when he sits down with Pandit Nehru.
Nehru makes an incredibly powerful, uncompromising assertion about the hypocrisy of the post-war order.
He argues that if the victorious powers are truly thinking of freedom for one world, then all racialism, the idea of one race or one nation being fundamentally superior to another, has to be completely and totally abandoned.
He specifically points to the treatment of Indians in South Africa, boldly stating that their treatment is on par with Nazi doctrine.
And he doesn't spare the United States either.
No, he doesn't.
He gently but firmly points out the painful, glaring contradiction of American diplomats preaching global freedom while actively denying that exact same freedom and basic civil rights to the Negro population back home in America.
Nehru is establishing the mechanism of moral authority. You cannot cooperate with or lead people who are not free.
And Corwin finds that exact same demand for dignity at the ground level, too.
We go back to that shattered Polish powerhouse on the Vistula River. Corwin looks at a grease-stained worker surrounded by the rubble of the atomic age and asks him if he thinks atomic energy is the greatest power in the world.
And the worker answers without hesitation. He says, "No, I don't think it is. I think the greatest power is the human being."
It's a beautiful moment.
It is, but I have to pause here and genuinely push back on Corwin's premise.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are looking at a world where millions are starving, where a cup of tea costs $100, where cities are reduced to ash, and where the Cold War is already calcifying.
Right.
Isn't it incredibly naive to point a microphone at a Polish worker or a New Zealand schoolboy and conclude that humanity is united? I mean, Did Corwin actually think a feel-good quote about human power was going to solve the geopolitical crisis of the atomic age? Or was this just good, emotionally manipulative radio theater?
Was he just wearing rose-colored glasses, basically?
Exactly.
It is a vital criticism. But if we impartially analyze the evidence in his own recordings, we find that he was actually deeply realistic about the threats. He didn't shy away from the ugly realities or edit out the darkness to fit some utopian narrative.
He definitely leaves the darkness in. He documents the brutal civil wars that were raging right under the surface of the so-called peace.
In China, he interviews both the nationalist mayor of Shanghai and the communist general Ye in piping.
Clearly broadcasting the deep fractures that American mediation was completely failing to fix.
And in the Philippines, he reports on the vicious fighting between government military police and the Hukbalahat peasant movement, explicitly noting the use of torture and the suspension of civil rights.
He goes to Egypt and is appalled by the extreme poverty, the rampant disease, and the government's systematic rounding up of liberals and intellectuals.
He even documents the lingering, terrifying persistence of fascism.
He stands in the Warsaw Ghetto, noting where 25,000 Jewish defenders were slaughtered, and reports the horrifying fact that just days before his arrival in Poland, 41 Jews were massacred in a pogrom in a town only 100 miles away.
Anti-Semitism didn't just vanish when Hitler died. Corwin finds an Australian on the street who casually states that Hitler still had a good idea.
He finds an Italian shouting that if the Allies don't treat them well, they will gladly make war tomorrow.
So he clearly sees the disease, he documents the fractures perfectly.
But where does his idealism come from then, if he is swimming in all this evidence of human cruelty?
His idealism lies in his belief in the cure. He genuinely believed and found overwhelming auditory evidence to support that the vast majority of human beings, when you strip away the political posturing and the nationalist propaganda, just want to live in peace.
They want to prosper economically and raise their families without the sky raining bombs on them.
He was realistic about the mechanisms of division, but idealistic about the possibility of recovery, provided humanity recognized its shared fate.
Which brings us to you, sitting in your living room or driving your car right now. Are we closer to that one world today, or are we further away?
Have we learned the lesson Corwin was trying to broadcast, or are we still trapped in Priestley's cycle, using our social feeds to project our own evils onto our neighbors?
Answering that requires us to look at why this specific broadcast still matters today, beyond just being a fascinating technical and historical artifact.
This is where we really lean into the spirit of what we do here at Chesterton Radio. Because Corwin's One World Flight is a permanent, indelible record of humanity standing at an absolute crossroads.
The world had just barely survived the ashes of fascism, and it was waking up to the dawn of the atomic age. Corwin captured the exact terrifying moment when people were trying to figure out which path to take.
And the philosophical framework he uses to explore this crossroads is deeply aligned with what we might call Chestertonian ideas.
First and foremost, the absolute dignity of the individual.
This is perhaps Corwin's greatest journalistic achievement and the perfect defense against the charge that he was being naive. Consider how he treats the people he interviews.
Right. In Egypt, in Abdon Square, he stops a 16-year-old mechanic.
This kid is supporting his mother, father, and 3 children on 15 piastres a day, which is about 60 cents.
He's uneducated. He actually thinks Hitler might still be alive and winning the war. He throws around American slang like hubba hubba without having any idea what it even means.
But look at how Corwin handles that interaction. He doesn't mock the boy. He doesn't use him as comic relief or dismiss him as ignorant.
He gives this boy's struggles the exact same journalistic reverence, the same airtime and serious consideration as he gives to President Beneš of Czechoslovakia or Prime Minister Adlai of Britain.
But I have to ask, why does an uneducated teenager's view matter to geopolitics? Why elevate his voice to the level of a prime minister?
Because that boy's poverty, his lack of education, and his vulnerability to propaganda are global symptoms. He is the one who will be drafted to fight the wars that the prime ministers declare.
His suffering is the direct result of the policies made in quiet rooms in London or Washington. Corwin elevates him because to understand the health of the world, you have to examine the people at the bottom of the structure, not just the architects at the top.
Which leads directly to another Chestertonian principle. He highlights the unity of mankind despite our massive cultural and geographic differences.
And he proves this unity not through political theory, but through shared trauma.
We go back to Italy for this. Corwin is dining outdoors in Rome, and he meets Sio, a young Italian partisan who fought the Nazis in the brutal conditions of the mountains.
Sio recounts that when they were lost in the mountains, freezing in the heavy snow and rain, with absolutely nobody to protect them but the cold stars above, every one of them looked up and asked the exact same question.
Why isn't there one world, one flag under which we can all march and be united?
It is a profound, almost spiritual realization born out of intense physical suffering.
And it points directly to the third and perhaps most crucial Chestertonian idea embedded in this series, the extreme danger of abstraction.
This is the core of it all. This is the mechanism of how political detachment causes real-world harm.
Politicians, generals, diplomats, by the very nature of their jobs, they inherently have to deal in abstraction.
They deal in maps, in statistics, in troop movements, in acceptable casualty rates, and economic yield percentages. They view the world from 30,000 feet.
But Corwin dealt in flesh and blood.
Yeah.
He dealt in the reality on the ground.
He forces the listener to realize that those abstract policies lead to tangible, horrific devastation. When diplomats fail, the result isn't just a shifted border on a map.
The result is Camellia starving in Genzano. The result is the Warsaw Ghetto.
Corwin crawls through the rubble of Warsaw, and he doesn't just see destroyed infrastructure. He sees a child's shoe in the debris. He sees a piece of scorched woodwork. He sees a porcelain bathtub with shrapnel holes shot straight through it.
Humanity is completely lost when people become statistics. When a casualty report is just a number on a page, it is incredibly easy to detachedly plan the next conflict.
Corwin used his wire recorder to put the voices of the widows, the orphans, and the starving back into the equation, forcing the architects of the atomic age to listen to the people who would burn if they failed.
And I really have to connect this to our modern era, because we suffer from a digital version of this exact abstraction.
We live in a time of algorithm-driven news where the loudest, most extreme, and most polarizing voices are artificially amplified because outrage generates engagement.
In that relentless noise, we almost entirely lose the ordinary voice. The algorithm does not reward nuance.
Algorithms do not favor the quiet dignity of a street vendor or the nuanced fear of a Danish finance minister or the profound grief of an Italian widow. They favor the shouting ideologue.
Which makes Corwin's absolute insistence that a street vendor's opinion matters just as much as a prime minister's a radical, almost revolutionary defense of the common man.
It's a vital reminder for all of us that the actual stakes of international diplomacy are paid for by the people riding the bus, not the people riding in the armored motorcades.
To ensure those ordinary voices echo through history, Corwin had to do more than just record them. He had to construct a compelling narrative.
We have to examine how his masterful execution of the craft made this series unforgettable.
His technical approach was brilliant. He essentially pioneered montage-style storytelling in audio, taking raw data and turning it into a gripping narrative.
The way he handled the healthcare debate in New Zealand is the perfect example of this mechanism.
Oh, that scene is amazing. He wants to explore New Zealand's system of socialized medicine. Instead of just doing a dry, journalistic report reading statistics, he creates an auditory illusion.
He records two different doctors with opposing views. He finds Dr. Ewan in Wellington, who is highly critical of the system, complaining about the bureaucratic red tape and the government trying to dictate how doctors practice.
And then he finds Dr. Jack in Auckland, who defends the system, arguing that the red tape is minimal and that doctors are actually better off financially because they are guaranteed payment.
But he doesn't just play one interview and then the other. He uses the editing process, which, remember, involved literally cutting and tying a magnetic wire to alternate their voices.
He creates a split-screen debate where the participants don't even know they're in the same room.
He weaves their arguments together so it sounds like a dynamic, fair, and incredibly engaging real-time debate.
It is a masterful manipulation of time and space to find a narrative truth. It keeps the pacing alive.
And he layers this documentary reality with his own narration, which is so deeply poetic and reflective.
He manages to blend hard-hitting, boots-on-the-ground journalism with the emotional resonance of high art. There is a moment where he describes his plane flying over the English Channel.
He looks down at the water, sparkling in the sun, and his mind immediately goes to the RAF pilots who died in those waters during the Battle of Britain.
He wonders aloud, if those drowned boys could talk, would they go for the idea of a world-made one?
It elevates the broadcast from news to literature. If we position him historically, we really have to place Norman Corwin alongside the absolute giants of the medium.
We often talk about how Orson Welles revolutionized radio drama with The War of the Worlds or his groundbreaking work with the Mercury Theater.
Wells pushed the boundaries of what fiction could do on the radio. He played with the listener's imagination.
Yes, but Norman Corwin arguably revolutionized the radio documentary.
He took the equipment out of the sterile, controlled studio environment and proved that the real world, captured authentically in all its messy, chaotic glory, possessed just as much drama and narrative power as any scripted play.
This monumental effort, this globe-circling, exhaustively produced series, was one of his final major works for CBS.
It cemented his legacy, absolutely. He didn't just report the news, he composed a symphony of the human experience.
He took the raw data of human suffering, hope, and geopolitical confusion, and he elevated it into a desperate plea for our survival in the atomic age.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've traveled 37,000 miles with Corwin tonight.
We've heard the hammering of reconstruction in Manila, the chaotic joy in Cairo, and the devastating silence of the Warsaw Ghetto.
I think we have to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Imagine Norman Corwin sets out tomorrow.
He is carrying a digital high-fidelity recorder instead of a spool of fragile wire. He flies to the exact same cities. He walks into the same squares, stops people on the exact same street corners. What does he hear?
Would he hear a world that has drawn closer to Wendell Willkie's dream of unity? Or would he hear a world fractured by entirely new divisions, new fears, and new digital abstractions?
The terrifying truth is that the one world Corwin was searching for, the unity that the Italian partisan CO dreamed of while freezing under the stars, it isn't just a destination we arrive at one day.
It isn't a treaty that gets signed into law and then we're done, safe forever.
No. It is a daily, active responsibility. It requires the active memory that the poet Louis Aragon spoke of in France, the conscious, unrelenting memory of what happens when we let fascism, division, and abstraction take root in our societies.
It requires all of us to look at the map of the world, to see beyond the clean lines and the neat colors, and to remember the messy, loud, complicated, and beautiful human beings living inside those borders.
It is the responsibility to actively listen to the ordinary voice, to reject the abstraction of algorithms and statistics, and to continually recognize our shared human dignity.
Thank you so much for joining us late tonight here on Chesterton Radio.
We hope this journey through the post-war world has given you something profound to mull over as you turn off the dial. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to tune into our daily live stream, step through the open door, and subscribe to our Substack to keep the conversation going. Until next time, we wish you a good night and a peaceful world.